Okay, welcome everyone. We have a quorum, so we'll kick things off. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here for this special session of the Sustainable Communities Working Group. And before we jump into our agenda, I'll pass it over to the interpreter for today's meeting, who will provide us with an explanation of how to use the interpretation device or access interpretation online.
Thank you. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are, click on the interpretation icon, which is a world, and then select English as your language. If you're joining through the Zoom mobile app, such as your cell phone or a tablet, please press on the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background, and headsets are available for interpretation. If you are in person in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist at the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación en español, desplácese a la parte inferior de su pantalla en el globo terráqueo donde aparecen los controles, haga clic en el icono de interpretación y seleccione español o Spanish. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil desde su Zoom, su celular o su tableta, presione los puntos suspensivos, luego presione interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, que significa silenciar el audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si usted se encuentra en la sala de reunión, por favor pida unos auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I now would like to ask Tessa, our clerk, to perform a roll call and confirm we have a quorum, please.
For the chair, Councilmember Lyons, Chair Lyons.
Present.
City of Carlsbad, Eric Lardy.
Here.
Chula Vista, Todd Phillips.
Here.
With Coronado, Jesse Brown.
Here.
County of San Diego, Tara Lieberman.
Here.
Del Mar, Amanda Lee.
Here.
El Cajon, Nora Alvey.
Here.
Sanitas, Patty Anders.
Present.
Escondido is absent. Imperial Beach, Reina Ayala.
Here.
La Mesa and Lemon Grove are absent. National City, Carlos Aguirre.
Here.
Oceanside, Sergio Madera.
Here.
Highway, Stan Don.
Here.
City of San Diego, Heidi Von Bloom.
Here.
San Marcos, Saima Kureshi.
Here.
Santee, Michael Coyne.
Here.
Solana Beach, Joseph Lim.
Present.
And Vista is absent. And for advisory members, we have Caltrans, Kim Dodson.
Here.
And the LAFCO, Joel Varilla.
Present.
And that confirms a quorum concludes the roll call.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for making the effort to come today. It's a good group. I'd like to remind everyone as far as when you want to have a moment to speak or have a question, please raise your hand. That's how we'll address the working group members. So I thank you for that. And then Tessa, can you please provide the public with a reminder of how the public will comment?
Thank you, Chair. If you are a member of the public in person, please complete speaker slips in advance of the item being called and submit them to me here. And if you're virtual, please raise your hand at the time the item presentation is completed or when the chair calls for comments. And I will call on those in person first and those virtually after that. Thank you, Chair.
All right, good. Thank you. It's good to have the reminder. Do any of the working group members have a question before we continue at this time? Seeing nothing, I will then proceed to the item number 1, communications, member comments, public comments. And so these are for non-agenda comments. First, do any of the working group members have non-agenda comments or announcements to share with the group here today? If so, raise your hand at this time. Seeing none, do we have any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 in-person public comments and 1 virtual. Catherine Rhodes, please come to the podium. You'll be followed by Purita Javier.
Hello, Catherine Rhodes, and what I wanted to talk about is homeless. So anyway, for myself, I've been trying to get the city of San Diego to allow us to use South Shore parking lot in Mission Beach or Fiesta Island or Deanza Cove for the homeless because it's state lands. But Todd Gloria would always when I would ask him, he would always tell me it's illegal to have residential in state tidelands. The Coastal Commission would never allow it, can't be done. But last month, as here it was, W14A, the California Coastal Commission approved NTC Liberty Station Barracks H for a homeless parking lot for the homeless on state tidelands. What this does, it opens up everything now for state tidelands that homeless could actually be on state tidelands. And the only 2 small little things that they asked for was that you capture your stormwater and that you have on-site wastewater disposal tanks, gray water, black water. And that was it. That's all we need in order to house people. And so, of course, I'm going to still try to do all the things in Mission Bay. But another perfect site, if we had funding for it, which funding is available at the County of San Diego through the federal ARPA funds. But in between Imperial Beach and Coronado, we have the Silver Strand State Beach, which has been closed since the Tijuana River pollution has closed the state beach for a couple of years now. So it's empty. It has 1,000 spots. We could get 1,000 homeless people off our streets into this area right here, ready to go. It has bathrooms. The only thing we would need is, I always say for the food, you should just have food trucks for the homeless, like they come into construction sites. And people, would have access to food. It's right next to a bus route going down to Imperial Beach or up to Coronado. And so this is what I'm trying to do right now is trying to find money at the county and get the county to basically fund things that Todd Gloria is trying to sabotage us on. For example, for Golden Hall and for some of the tents in Balboa Park, Todd Gloria tries to pretend that the permits are going to expire because they're temporary. Temporary permits can be renewed every year, no problem. It's no big deal at all to renew it for 20 years. And so all we have to do is follow the
And your time
fire
expired.
marshal recommendations. Thank you.
Purita Javier, please come to the podium. You'll be followed by Cesar Javier.
Good morning. Thank you, Sandag. I am Purita A. Javier, victim of toxicity since 1997, and my husband, Cesar B. Javier, beginning in 2012 from Next Door Ceramics Manufacturing and Keln Industrial Home business since 1984. Owned and operated by Donald J. Fraser and wife Evelyn Fraser, located at 5238 Streamview Drive, San Diego, California 92105, and situated in the residential zone designated community. Science through research and studies explains that hazards in ceramics are air contaminants or airborne particulates from firing kilns and even toxic dust when inhaled and ingested will cause sneezing, coughing, watery eyes, dizziness, irregular headache, irregular heart palpitation, which we both experienced in the past, even now when they fire the oven makeshift. Fear lures because it leads to asthma, other respiratory disease, lung cancer. In fact, Center from Disease Control, CDC, or its health bulletin of 2020 pandemic declared that repetitive heating of clay mixed with chemicals and metals such as silica lead from glazing, coloring, genetics, or produces toxicity from kiln. Formally, we reported to the lawful authority on June 13, 2021, such as the San Diego Police, County Sheriff's, Fire Department, and County Hazmat all responded but cannot conduct investigation because the owner has business tax permit, $38 annual fee. We opened the case as advised by the city
And your
attorney
time has
office,
expired.
abatement
Ma'am,
division.
thank you. Our next commenter, Cesar Javier. Please go
Good
ahead.
afternoon. I am the husband, also a victim. We were hospitalized. Self-evacuation, if we may say that. And to our fellow citizens region-wide, this is a lesson in our community. Look around, find them, locate them. Let's check it, correct it as soon as possible. This is an emergency call for all of us. There are 40 ceramics artists under the San Diego Pottery Guild based in Spanish Village, Balboa Park. We talked to one of the members and they declared themselves that in 20 years, when we started this trade, we will be getting sick or die. It's true as we experience it, from sneezing up to this psychological impact, fear for the both of us. Look around in your neighborhood. These artists, I don't know what to say, but I'm not against them. I just wanted them to put the kiln or this oven in the rightful place, the safe place. Industrial zone, commercial zone, as we have observed for some of these traders. And that's what we would like to ask from you, to help us all together, for all of us, to ensure that we have clean and safe community. We reside in a beautiful place, District 9, west bank of Solas Creek. This is a historic creek, Komeai primitive land. And we self-impose volunteers to ensure that we have this beautiful home, safe and clean community. Thank you for your help, ma'am. I could only give one copy of the documentation. We have exhausted our resources from the beginning in 2021. We have reached the city, the county, and the Air Pollution Control District, including the federal EPA, US EPA. There are two big things here, the Rule 11 and the way it is implemented. I think those who are the culprit and or culprits. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, as this is a sustainable Communities Working Group, it's basically a misnomer. It's very sad to see what's actually going around in our nation and in our communities here locally, as we have an invasion happening on our border and everybody wants to ignore it. So I'm not sure if you guys pay attention to what's actually going on around the nation with all of the illegals that have invaded our nation and are taking over cities and destroying them. And we sit here and we put them ahead of the line to get so many things that the people in our communities have been vying for and just asking for decades on end, things that people need. And we're never going to have sustainable communities when there's destruction happening on a massive scale across the nation. And we sit here and we, pretend like that's not really happening. And it's very dangerous to go down that path and act like everything is fine and we just need to go about business as usual. But we should really be paying attention to the people that are coming across and the fact that, we don't even have enough resources for the people in our own community to be sustainable, as you would call it. People have been waiting on lists just to get into homes. They have been waiting for, just the services that should be provided to the people on a scale that, these illegals are actually getting. And like I said, they go to the first of the line to get housing, even if they're homeless, like at Cesar Chavez Park, where there were several homeless illegals that had been posted up for quite some time since spring. And then as soon as, they get removed, they get to go into temporary housing where others are just having their stuff taken. They're being arrested. They are being displaced even more than they were. And so I think you guys need to do, some soul searching and looking within to see if when you're doing something about a sustainable community, if you really understand what's going on, you would, then want to push to make sure that the people in our communities that have been suffering for decades are actually getting the resources that they need, and they aren't being pushed aside by these people who invade our border and are going to the top of the line. And, that's not xenophobic. It's realistic to be talking about these things. But it seems that, when people are talking about the border being secure or whatever that is, that's not really taking place. And there's people out in the unincorporated area whose lives are affected on a daily basis by these people who cross onto their land, start fires, do so many things, and they can't do anything about it. All while these people come in and get carte blanche to everything and anything they could possibly want. And so why is there a reason why they wouldn't come? There isn't one. There's more reason to come than isn't. But this is a United Nations agenda, and you guys are following that with the sustainable community. So it would behoove you to pay attention to what's actually going on in the nation and understand how dangerous it is.
When your time expired, and that concludes the public comments.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all of our public speakers for your comments. Parita and Cesar, I do have your document. Thank you. And it has your contact information. Thank you for that. And with that, we will then move on to item number 2, which is the consent agenda. And item number 2 includes the minutes from the June 20th meeting. Do we have any comments from the public on this item, Clerk?
I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Thank you for acknowledging Cesar and Parita. I hope you do actually reach out to them. I think it's very important to listen to what the public says. But as far as the minutes go, and when we're talking about smart growth incentives and things like that, it seems that the county and Sandag and all of the other communities, even the cities, get in their own way of being able to provide the housing that needs to be provided, because what we're doing is encompassing, it's saving the planet, and that it's something that is never going to happen when the destruction is actually man-made with man-made weather warfare. And again, this United Nations agenda 21, 2030, 2050 to have sustainable communities and whatnot. But we are, instead of just providing the housing that needs to be provided, like affordable housing, because that's something that, if you provide incentives or a way out, a fee that people can pay in order to not have to be providing all of the affordable housing, then none of it actually gets produced. And people, continue to move out of the county and even the state because of the state of you know, what's going on and the fact that there's nothing that is affordable. And when you say it's affordable, it's up into the, you know, say $900,000 range, which nobody can afford. And when you're sitting here and bringing in the climate and, you know, trying to mitigate things by bringing in even VMT, vehicle miles traveled, or whatever it is, you're actually getting in the way of being able to provide what needs to be provided. And it's really sad because it's a lot of busy work that gets done. It's a lot of things that don't move the needle forward. And if we really cared about providing the homes that need to be provided for people, that wouldn't be a case. We wouldn't be preserving open space for gnats and gnat catchers and different toads and whatever it is that, you know, is seemingly being preserved, all while the people suffer. So we shouldn't be at the cost of people, you know, try to protect a planet that doesn't need protecting. And in that, you would want to acknowledge the fact of the geoengineering and different things that actually take place. Like when the storms happened in January, that was due to cloud seeding. And there are different states that actually go and they are fighting against the geoengineering and the weather warfare that's taking place, all while our community is sitting here and not acknowledging that it's happening. And there's so much neglect that goes on with even just the infrastructure to make sure that people aren't losing everything they have. So I would implore you to really look at what's going on and understand that if we want to provide this housing, we should be doing everything in our power to do it, not be providing incentives or de-incentives, de-incentivize things like putting homes just wherever it is. You know, basically you're putting us in 15-minute cities so that everything is in walkable distance. Sure, that might be nice, but it shouldn't be at the cost of actually providing what needs to be provided for the people that have been waiting for a very long time just to have a house.
And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you, Clerk. With that, are there any working group comments, or is there a motion to approve item 2? And if you move, could you please also, for the clerk's benefit, say your name? Are there any questions or a motion?
And Chair, I beg your pardon.
Sure.
For those of you who may be new or not at the last meeting, you do not have to be present at the meeting to approve the minutes.
Well, thank you for that clarification.
Move to approve the minutes. Chula Vista,
Chula
Todd.
Vista, Todd Phillips. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second from Carlos Aguirre, National City.
Thank you. And I think on this one, our direction is to raise our hands. Clerk, is that going to work? Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, looks unanimous. Thank you. One primary item we're here for today is item number 3. I'd like to introduce Chueri Faola, Deputy Director of Sustainable Communities, and Stacy Cooper, Senior Regional Planner, who will provide an overview of comments received from the SANDAG Executive Committee on a draft letter outlining legislative principles for RHNA reform and seek additional feedback from us, the Sustainable Communities Working Group members.
All right. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, working group members, for joining us this afternoon for a very special meeting to talk about the Regional Housing Needs Assessment and the RHNA reform effort that is being underway by HCD. We are also joined by Samantha Folk, who is a senior legal counsel here at SANDAG. She's going to be helping as we're going to have a little bit of a different way of how we're going to do this working group meeting, where we're going to be pausing several times throughout the presentation to receive your feedback. And so Sam will be helping us in trying to track some of that, and she's certainly very well versed in RHNA. So if there are any legal type questions that we get into, she will be available to answer any of that. But before we go into our presentation and kind of our more workshop type of form, I do want to just put a little bit of a reminder of kind of where we've been and kind of where we are now and bringing us to this point. So as a reminder, HCD actually started their RHNA reform effort. This was last year around the March timeframe of 2023, and they continue to ask different questions and do their outreach from March all the way until September of last year. And they did this through various methods of a survey, as well as they had sounding board listening sessions. They also offered the opportunity for people to provide feedback via email to them. And SANDAG, as your regional partner through this, we made sure that we were bringing updates to you along the way through that time frame, through convening you through this working group and in other forums to help explain some of the stuff that HCD was asking, and to also encourage you to provide your feedback to them through that outreach opportunity that they put forward. All of this ended up culminating into basically where our board of directors requested that HCD come and actually talk to them and hear directly from the locals, because there was a lot of sentiments that the locals were not being heard and were not directly involved in terms of the outreach that they were conducting from March to September of 2023. And so we did have staff from HCD who came and had a listening session with the board of directors. And about 2 weeks after that listening session, our intention was to send a letter to HCD kind of outlining some of the things that were mentioned at the board meeting. But 2 weeks later, they released their Regional Housing Needs Assessment RHNA reform report to the legislator. And so that was released in April. We then spent the summer coming back to this working group, also to the executive committee, giving you an overview of what was in the report, where we have things that we're monitoring and tracking, and to begin to hear some of your feedback on that. Throughout the summer, one of the key things that our staff did was actually presented this to our executive committee. We're planning to tomorrow present this also to our regional planning committee. But at the executive committee, something that was different that we didn't present to you in the July meeting is that there was a legislative letter, which is also attached to your report today, that outlined key principles that we've heard through all of the feedback we heard at the March session that was with the HCD and our board, that we heard through the July session with the Sustainable Communities Working Group. And we captured that into a letter that is proposed to be sent to the Senate Housing Committee chairs. And so we presented that to our executive committee, and they gave us several points of feedback and asked us to come back to the Sustainable Communities Working Group and work with you on how we might be able to restructure, really strengthen some of the language that's in there. And so that's what we're here today to do. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stacy. She's going to give just a brief reminder of some of the feedback that we've heard along the way from the different groups that we've talked to. She's going to go through the legislative principles that is, again, it is included as part of your report package, and give you the feedback that we heard from our executive committee. And then we really want to open it up for dialogue and discussion so that we can talk about how we might strengthen that language or get your feedback on what was proposed as part of that letter. And then we'll come to you again at your next meeting in the same month. So we feel very special getting your time 2 times in 1 month. But we'll come back to you and present the revisions to that letter before we bring it back to our executive committee. And again, I do want to emphasize this is a dialogue. And so this is not just staff wanting to give you all of the information. We really want to hear from you and make sure that we're capturing your feedback so that we can go back and bring that revised letter to you at your next meeting. So Stacy, go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. To recap, this was the feedback that the board provided to HCD at the March board meeting. Members voiced their concerns over the lack of transparency, funding, and flexibility, and the loss of local control. As Trey mentioned, HCD's legislative report was released a few weeks after that meeting. And then when we came to you guys in June, this is an overview of the report. And like the board, the working group was very interested in being more involved in the 7th cycle and echoed comments about the lack of transparency and funding. You also requested more clarity and timely guidance from HCD in a variety of areas, and the state's consideration in prioritizing the number of people housed versus the number of housing units built. So with board direction, SANDAG staff drafted a letter of guiding principles to be sent to the Senate and Assembly House chairs for consideration during the upcoming legislative cycle. The HCD legislative report and letter were presented at Executive Committee in July. One of the Executive Committee's board delegated responsibilities is to review and act on state and federal legislation. The Executive Committee voted to approve the proposed legislative principles and provided direction to staff to work with this group to revise the language in the letter and incorporate 3 additional principles. The following slides contain the language included in the draft letter and the feedback provided by EC. We'll pause after each principle to incorporate your feedback, and then when we come to an agreement, we'll move on to the next. So these were the original sustainable funding, local context, greater transparency, a regional approach, and prioritizing the number of people housed. So the first one was sustainable funding. And as you can see up on the screen, I'm just going to read what was proposed in the original letter. So more funding is needed to support affordable housing. Local jurisdictions need funding to enact policies and processes that encourage housing development, and developers need funding to make non-market rate projects financially viable. The Regional Action Planning grants, or REAP, provided by the state further the jurisdiction's ability to implement the 6th cycle RHNA. However, ongoing state and federal funding is necessary to meet housing needs. And then the bullets below list the feedback from EC. So they requested stronger language that there's not adequate funding to meet housing goals. And they also wanted to include an estimate of the amount needed to fulfill our Region 6 cycle. So one of the examples that was given is that we have a need of about 70,000 low and very low income units. So with an average cost of 700,000 per unit, it would cost approximately $49 billion. Then I'm going to turn it over to all of you for your feedback and comments. And Sam's going to be writing up to revise the language. And then once we kind of come to a pause, she will read that, or I will read the revised language, and we'll see if we have agreement to move forward to the next one.
And so if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, I certainly support the executive committee's addition of stronger language related to funding, particularly for the capital investment, less of the planning. I mean, I think there's been quite a bit of investment in the planning, both for regional and local assistance. But as we see in Solana Beach, we're unable to get approved projects funded to be built. So we certainly support that language.
Very good. Some more. I'll go with Heidi next.
Good afternoon. Certainly agree on the need for funding. In addition, I'll echo what Solana Beach has raised, is that there needs to be more than just funding for planning, and also more than just the funding for the cost of the units themselves. There's additional costs associated with taking on the new housing. And so we've seen examples of this through the Housing Related Parks program. The city was able to complete several major park improvements in communities of concern with funding from that program. But in order to be able to create the great communities that we are planning for, we are not just planning for homes in a vacuum. We are planning for homes in need of supportive infrastructure, public services, and parks. As well as ongoing maintenance as well for those services. So I would encourage you to note that these are estimates that are short-term and immediate, but there's other more comprehensive costs associated with it. And then also our comment is related to how that funding is distributed. And I would like there to be some acknowledgement that jurisdictions that are taking on most of the housing can have proportional funding related to the RHNA requirement as well as the RHNA production. Thank you.
Great comments. Saima?
Yeah, thank you. Most of my comments were just covered just now. Basically, I looked at this 70,000 cost, which is just the cost of the actual units, but there should be some acknowledgement of all the infrastructure needed to produce the units and long-term maintenance of all the services needed. So we do agree with the stronger language on quantifying the needed funding for this region.
And are there any other thoughts that, to contribute at this time? Yes, Carlos.
Yes, I appreciate the input that was provided by the executive committee. I think there's a lot of frustration. And I think what needs to be rethought about RHNA in particular is how we deal with two different issues of RHNA. One is the fact that there's just enough funding to produce a number of units that are needed. And that's just inherently a problem. You can't have a goal if it's not a realistic goal. You're not going to be able to fulfill it. So I think there should be a two-tier approach to RHNA. One is you establish a need and you establish what realistically you can fund with the set of funding sources you have, whether it be tax credits, density bonus, whatever the programs may be. And that's going to be a subset of the need. So you move forward with that realistic, implementable need over the next RHNA cycle, but you hold leadership accountable to think about what funding solutions there are for the need we can't meet because the funding solutions aren't currently there. And if we can't fulfill that, we shouldn't frustrate production by holding us accountable to a greater number.
Very good comments. Seeing no other hands at this time, I would like to add a comment. I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about what our thoughts are and how it might affect each of our individual communities. So I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity by saying that we struggle in my city of Encinitas with how do we approach 100% affordable housing, and we want to focus on being able to address the affordable housing issue as a jurisdiction. And I've just never seen that the private sector is going to solve this problem for us. So the 100% affordable housing, when you have a jurisdiction that's willing to step up and come to the plate and kind of fight and bring it forward, the big obstacle, of course, is funding. So my lens is to see what you can directly do to help jurisdictions with the 100% affordable housing element of the solution, because I see there's a big need there. Any other final questions or comments? I think you got your input.
I think we did. And so Sam is finishing up her typing. What we want to do here, and something I think we failed to mention at the beginning, because it is quite a number of topics that we want to go through, and we will be revising the letter immediately after. If any of you have seen, we've done this exercise with our board of directors that we found to be effective in making sure that we're getting everyone's opinion heard on the topics. And so we do this kind of like thumbs up if you're good with the comments that have been made. And so we're going to put those comments on the screen so that you're able to see them. And if you are good with them, we are asking that you can just kind of give a thumbs up. This is not a voting on it. It's just simply saying, yes, I'm good with the comments that have been given. If you are not as thrilled, but you could live with it, sideways. And then really what we're looking to understand is if there's anyone who's going to put their thumbs down, that something that we've captured in terms of the comments you don't agree, so that we can talk through that and we can make sure that we're really understanding what we need to capture when we bring back a revised letter for you in that. So thank you. This is the language that's been captured here. And so we'll give you just a second to take a look. But I think we were hearing that we're all in agreement related to the stronger language about funding, but really being focused more on the capital investment side, not just planning. And then breaking that down into talking about it's not just the unit cost, but it's all of the supportive infrastructure that goes along with it, as well as that ongoing maintenance. And then acknowledging that when we do move into this direction, that there should be proportional funding given to those jurisdictions who take on a larger share of that housing. And then really looking at a two-tiered approach that's not just analyzing the housing need from the unit side, but also the funding gap and holding those responsible to help us, to our leaders to fulfill that funding gap. And then really also talking about how 100% affordable housing, there's a huge funding gap that's needed for that. And it's not going to happen with just the private sector participation only.
And you're looking for a reaction in regards to thumbs up or
Yes, we're
thumbs down
looking for
to
your
the
reaction in terms of do we feel that this fully captures it? Do we feel we're missing something? Does someone
everybody?
not like it? And yes, we are looking for all.
So we have
Heidi, I
some
see
thumbs
you
up and we have
your
a hand up.
And this is meant
I'll
to be a
take some
dialogue,
hands
so
up.
yes.
So some thumbs up. Heidi, did you have your hand up?
I think I just have some clarifying questions about what's on here. Acknowledgement that jurisdictions receive funding in proportion to housing allocated. I read that to mean like that it's a fact that that happens, and that's not accurate. So I would request that the language be adjusted to say desire for jurisdictions to receive funding in proportion to housing allocated. And then on the last bullet point for the 100% affordable housing funding needed for jurisdictions to fill need without private developer participation, that's okay. But I think that there should also be an acknowledgement that there's possibilities for city to participate in market rate housing as well in order to be able to make projects pencil overall, especially as we're looking to use our land as a landholder to be able to produce housing. And then I just maybe to dovetail on what Carlos was saying from National City, I think it's important not just to look at the funding gap of the difference, but looking at what our need is and then what a production target is, more realistically speaking, because right now we all just have a target and none of them, we all do the city of San Diego is trying to do its best. And I know a lot of you guys are too, to be able to meet it. but there are other constraints at play, one of which is funding.
Does that edit make sense there, but also production target and funding gap?
I
Heidi,
think
did
so.
you? Oh, okay. Some thoughts? Yes?
Definitely. I'm definitely in agreement with that change. I think what needs to be cemented though is the fact that we can't be held, our production numbers can't be tied to housing need. They need to be tied with what can feasibly be funded. So that, I think that analysis can be made. And then if there is a gap between housing need and what can be feasibly be funded and distributed amongst everyone in the state, then there should be maybe a longer term analysis into the next RENA cycle as to how those would be funded. But we can't hold jurisdictions accountable for production if it's just absolutely not feasible.
As we're doing some wordsmithing here, there's some more comments?
Yes.
Yes.
And I completely agree with the comments that have been said, but my suggestion was just to have an overarching comment to enter, that it's recognized that development of housing is expensive and complex, because I think the RENA conversation is a complete oversimplification of how big this is, which is why for all of us, funding such a huge need. There's not going to be unlimited funding. We're going to have to figure out how to prioritize. And that's where we're all going to have to come to agreement. So it needs some type of overarching statement before we get into the detail. Thanks.
All right, good thoughts. Maybe we'll wait a minute to let Samantha get caught up and kind of absorb what the comments are that are written here and how they were integrated into this response.
I think Heidi had mentioned on the last bullet about participation in market rate housing. Was there something specific that you wanted to add there? I think I missed that.
I just didn't want it to be limited to 100% affordable housing projects, because I also think that mixed income projects are very important for our communities. So I just didn't want it to be limited to 100%. While I have the mic, if it's okay, on the first bullet point, I do think it's important to recognize that it's complex, but I also, for me to give a thumbs up, would also want to recognize that it's important and that it's something that we need to take on. I don't want bullet point number 1 to be confused as a statement from this working group that we are wanting to get out of RENA requirements. Many of us are pro-housing jurisdictions, and we do want to see the housing. So it's a matter of, acknowledging the complexities and the challenges, but also a commitment to implementation.
I believe Kim.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. Thank you. Is it
Kimberly.
Kim?
Yes, Kimberly Caltrans.
Thank you.
I do have a question for the last bullet. Do you want to clarify the way I'm reading it right now for affordable housing funding needed for jurisdiction to fill need without private developer participation? Would that exclude then any kind of potential for a private developer to participate? Or do we want to change that language so that would say not just only private developer participation?
I think you make a good point.
Can the body please help me with language?
Yeah, I know, I'm trying to, and perhaps what's confusing it is the last 3 words. If we remove the last 3 words, make it more broad. For affordable housing funding needed for jurisdictions to fill the need without being specific about who participates.
I think you could say in addition to the private development market.
How do we feel about what's on the screen from the perspective of any other comments first? And if not, then let's give our feedback to Turi. Where are we at with it? Are we thumbs up? Let's see if we are. We do have a thumbs down on the left. Oh, you're, oh, what do you do with that?
If there's something specific that you're sideways for and you'd like us to expand upon, you're welcome, but
I think that was one of the three options, right? It was thumbs up, thumbs down, or even. So
yeah.
No objections.
Okay. Okay, good. Good clarification. It looks like we can move on.
All right, moving on to the second principle, local context. Local jurisdictions are responsible for planning and developing policies that encourage housing development, but do not control market conditions or the building industry. An 8-year cycle is not enough time to make up for a decades-long housing shortage. New policies and processes take time to take effect. When assessing each jurisdiction's progress towards RHNA, HCD should consider comprehensive efforts taken throughout the cycle to encourage housing development. And the feedback we received from EC was they also requested stronger language, reiterating that jurisdictions don't build housing. And they wanted us to include something about the deadline that halfway through the 6th RHNA cycle is June 2025, and request that a jurisdiction putting forth good faith efforts not lose land use authority of multi-use family projects, so not be subject to SB 35 or 23.
All right, we'll open this up to the working group then for some comments, questions, anything that comes to your mind that you'd like to give input on at this time. Yes, Patty.
So one of the concerns we have, and we may get a project approved, entitled, but then it gets held hostage in Coastal Commission for 2 years. So any streamlined benefit and all the work we've done to get affordable housing is really negated because we don't get to include those units. I mean, they're in our report and report them, but we don't get a unit until I think it's building permit. So it's a huge issue, I think, across coastal communities. I've had other cities reach out to me asking what we do, and it really is, it completely removes any streamlining benefit whatsoever. So I think there needs to be acknowledgement that that's a significant issue and impediment in meeting RHNA.
May I just, Patty, ask for some clarification? Would you say that that's what, in the last sentence of the original wording, it says, should consider comprehensive efforts taken throughout the cycle to encourage housing development? Are you saying that there needs to be some detail there that says like this?
I think there needs to be specific acknowledgement that cities are really held hostage once Coastal Commission is involved, because there's no tool to make them perform in a timely manner. And most of when you get in that cycle, it's a 2-year review if you're lucky. So it's an incredible impediment to allow us to meet our RHNA for coastal communities.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
I was just going to clarify, we do experience similar, but we also have projects that have been approved by our jurisdiction as well as Coastal Commission. And it's really market conditions that are preventing those projects from fully finishing their entitlements. So they've been approved, but not with building permits to actually count. And the feedback is coming straight from those developers that they're just not in a position to be able to move forward. So that's, I think, builds into that first bullet under the executive committee feedback. I mean, jurisdictions do build housing, but we don't have control over all the housing that's being built that we're expected to produce.
Thank you for that. Yes.
So on the first bullet, perhaps a way to just to expand it is talk about there are other constraints, including other governmental agencies, market conditions, interest rates, so to speak. Carlsbad does experience similar delays in some of its projects related to the Coastal Commission. I think another thing related to the second bullet point is in the 6th cycle RHNA, a lot of the RHNA assigned to the San Diego region was really making up for things outside of our control as well. Short-term rentals, vacancy rate, other things that are decades long. And if you looked at some of the other jurisdictions, regions, there was even more things added onto it. So expecting the 7th cycle, maybe there's some way where there needs to be sort of a two-tiered RENA that says this is part of your RENA for the current and then part of the last, and that be factored into the SB 35 and SB 423 mandates, because it seems likely that a lot more jurisdictions are going to get picked up in the current production cycles because our RENA was so large this time.
Thank you, Eric. I saw some nods down at the table, so I think they understand your point on that. Yes, Heidi.
Thank you for comments regarding the Coastal Commission. I do think it is important feedback for the state to align its housing goals with other goals that come down from the state, particularly with respect to the coastal review. I don't know if this is the right place, but since we are talking about local context, to talk about group quarters and what counts as part of the group quarters and what maybe should not count as part of the group quarters and should count towards the RENA, particularly with respect to military housing as well as student housing. Currently, as I understand it, we have some good partners in UCSD, as well as the community colleges and the state colleges as well, that are looking to provide housing, but currently those would count as group quarters and not count towards the overall housing production, even though the lack of that housing does result in negative housing space for other populations within the community. And then my other comment is to also ask HCD to use the pro-housing designation to assess the jurisdiction's comprehensive efforts to encourage housing development.
Heidi, quick question of clarification. Do you want to add the group quarters to this, or would you prefer to add it as an additional principle?
We could do that as an additional one. I was just trying to fit it into your topics here.
Yeah, this is some really good input. So just kind of had a shot across the bow that this is great input. It's taking a little bit of time. We may go a little bit beyond our 3:30. Just kind of want to give people a heads up. Yeah. And hopefully we can stay complete. I don't see any other hands right now on this.
One moment, we're making sure we captured it all.
So I'll need a little help. I think it was Heidi's last comment using the pro-housing designation. I didn't catch the end of that.
Just looking at as an overall factor in assessing a jurisdiction's comprehensive efforts to encouraging housing development.
And then I believe Eric had made a comment earlier, and I think Tueri was nodding her head, but I didn't catch it all. So if we could go back to that, you had mentioned a two-tier approach.
Maybe a more concise way is just factor in market conditions as jurisdictions are being determined eligible for SB 35. So maybe a little more flexibility, factoring in increased RENAs.
Captured most of it. Is this all of it? You made a statement at the very end that I didn't catch.
How about market conditions and increasing RENA allocations?
All right. I was reading the word. Sorry, Heidi, your hand is up again.
Sorry, I do have a comment on the eligibility for SB 35. I do think it's important for there to be a hammer when jurisdictions are not meeting their RENA. So I would be a thumbs down on this bullet point without an acknowledgement that that should not be a full way to get out of RENA requirements.
And now we have Patty on this side.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for the first bullet, I think it needs to explicitly state that it's not just that they can benefit from, but that it prevents us from meeting our RENA because we can get tied up for well over 2 years.
And can we go back and once Sam adds that in there, maybe to Heidi's comment, because she did say she'd be a thumbs down on this last bullet point and how we might want to rephrase. So you'd like it to not just say factor in, but you want to have some language around, maybe you could help us expand a little bit on what you'd like to see us change.
What I would hate to see is using this feedback that turns into some sort of regulation that exempts jurisdictions from meeting their RENA requirements without any remedy. There does have to be a remedy for not meeting it.
I'd be open to any suggestions, or if it's the will of this group to remove that statement, just with the comment is that SB 35 is one portion of meeting arena. There's also the capacity portion. So it's a piece of that. I also did not intend for it to be to remove that as a consider to have production goals, but our production goals are also related to market conditions as well as they have continued to go up and likely will continue to go up. So making them harder to meet.
If I can suggest that maybe we could leave SB 35 out of it and focus on having a discussion about capacity versus production targets.
I would support that.
All right. It is very hard to wordsmith with a group this size. So I know, Samantha, you're looking for some clarity. Was that good on that last bullet?
If what I'm understanding is correct, we may be able to remove this bullet. There is discussion in, it looks like the second bullet point around market conditions, which prevent developers from continuing with projects. I don't know if we really addressed the capacity issue elsewhere, but looking for some guidance on whether or not we're eliminating the last bullet on SB 35, we're just modifying it.
And Amanda, did you have some thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, it relates to this as well as the bottom two bullets. I think the point is the good faith efforts of the jurisdiction. I think we're getting too specific. I would definitely put a thumbs down on the pro-housing designation. Not all of us are in a position to have that. So everyone should be measured on their good faith efforts. You have targets, you have expectations, and so you have a record that you're able to show. And obviously market conditions are out of the city's control. They're out of the state's control. This is part of the narrative as you go through. And when another authoritative role has an approving, they're approving authority and they're holding up a project, that's part of the narrative. So I feel like that second bullet and the last two could be combined, but it really needs to talk about the good faith efforts of the jurisdictions. That's the record that's important. Thanks.
Okay. And Noah.
Noah Alvey with the City of El Cajon. I would concur with those comments with regards to the pro-housing designation. Like not all of us are in that position to be able to make those efforts at this point. Additionally, I think one of the factors that's important when it comes to market conditions is that smaller jurisdictions have more localized market conditions, which may make it more challenging to be reactive. I mean, we're all going to make those good faith efforts, but we don't necessarily have those different neighborhoods that the city of San Diego may be able to rely on. So I think being able to factor in market conditions when reassessing that is important.
I think these are really good points and I'm learning a lot. So thank you. There may be some things like the pro-housing that would be valuable to some jurisdictions, but definitely not all is what I'm hearing. Certainly a broader statement is valuable. And if you feel as though it's important to identify pro-housing as an example that some communities would benefit from, that might be.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be the only factor,
Yeah.
but I think, yeah, we could combine some of these ones, including market conditions as well as the pro-housing status as a factor. But there are other factors as well, of course. If I could request, I know this is a really hard task, and maybe this goes back to the other one as well, but I think the capacity issue is really important to not let go of, and that this discussion is more focused on the production.
And we'll go to Tara.
Thank you. So shifting gears here a little bit, I would like to focus on the third bullet point down, since we're acknowledging alignment with housing goals with other state goals, and we're referencing the Coastal Commission review. I'd also like to acknowledge the impact of bills like SB 743, in particular within the county, that can be considered a barrier to development within certain areas and sometimes an impediment to meeting our RHNA targets.
And you're putting that forward as just another example of what demonstrates that point.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Jesse.
Yeah, Jesse, City of Coronado. Also on the group quarters, I think we want to encourage the state to have group quarters be eligible to be counted towards RHNA, not just, not just that they're accounted for at the RHNA process, but they need to be eligible units. We had to go through quite a process with the state to call them SROs and go through all these definitions and look at floor plans for military housing quarters. And especially if military jobs are part of the formula that Sandag is using, which I don't think it should be. But if it is, the military requires enlisted personnel to live on base and within those quarters. So having to provide housing for jobs that exist when they have to live on base doesn't really make sense. But I think we want those group quarters to be counted.
And we'll go back to Heidi again.
I think we need to have a distinction here, especially on the, especially when we talk about the housing goals in alignment with other state goals, because things like the location in VMT efficient areas, if I understand it, are accounted for in the allocation to begin with.
Say that one more time.
So there's a difference between the allocation and then meeting the production, right? So if state goals are being accounted for in the allocation process, then there doesn't need to be that consideration again necessarily in the production. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, if you're referring to the methodology from the sixth cycle, the board of directors is going to have another opportunity to define that methodology. So it may or may not end up being considered in the 7th cycle methodology, depending on which direction the board goes.
Okay, yeah, because I just would say that I do think that some of these are factors, especially in the SB 743 context in the allocation process. But I get what you're saying. It's harder.
We have spent a good amount of time on this one, and some good information has been shared. We might be ready to see if we want to give a thumbs up or not.
Yeah, I think we still have, so the 2 bullets at the bottom, I kind of set aside. It sounded like we were talking a little bit about combining my attempt at that as the bullet above. So the last bullet in that kind of bigger paragraph. I don't know if I captured everything that people were referring to in combining those 2 bullets, but I guess, are we comfortable with that last bullet in the top, addressing the issues that were brought up for the last 2? And are we ready to remove the last 2 bullets, the ones referencing SB 35 and the pro-housing designation bullet?
So let's have a thumbs up or down on just that last bullet, the one before the gap, which is meant to summarize the 2 below it. Would that be all right? Okay, we got a medium. We got a thumbs up. Okay, some thumbs up. Eric, did you have a comment though? Then you were.
Yeah, the only comment I have, I like most of it. I was just going to recommend maybe it needs to just say when capacity and production is evaluated. Because I note that the executive committee did specifically call out SB 35 in their comments. And if the idea of having capacity and production both evaluated was in it, then I would agree to remove the very last bullet.
I added, but it doesn't make sense to me now. Assess, so when assessing jurisdiction, capacity and production, is that more like it? I think I added some language, but not in the right place.
Yeah, maybe at the end of the sentence instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting there. Okay, do we have, so can we remove the last two then for simplicity of thumbs up on the remaining?
Oops. There we go.
And
being
so here we have
patient.
local context. And we have these 5 points. Do we have a thumbs up or thumbs down? Could you give your comments, your thumbs? Show us your thumbs. We're good. Thank you.
Great. Moving on to number 3. So there was agreement on this request from the executive committee. So HCD RENA report recommends implementing procedural and informational enhancements to the current process, but there's a lack of information on how and when these changes will be made. We request timely guidance and greater transparency on changes to the regional housing needs determination process and any changes that will be required in housing elements. Executive committee agreed on that. Does everybody in this room agree as well?
Any comments, any initial thoughts? Is there anything you want to add for clarity, Heidi?
I had additional comment on this. I do agree with the statement, but in addition, we would specifically like to request that we get guidance to local governments on how to report permitted homes that are not deed restricted, but will be naturally affordable to very low and moderate income households.
Is there any part of that you'd like repeated, Samantha?
I believe I have that text in a letter that was provided by the city and we can.
Yes, it's in there.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
All right, good. That helps with the comment. Yes, Amanda.
That was great, what Heidi added. And then I was just going to say the transparency I know was an important thing that came up in our jurisdiction. Obviously, Sandag knows. Really the question about the jobs data. So any information we rely on should be something that can be replicated in terms of modeling and that the information's available to the public so that there aren't questions about how those numbers were arrived at.
We'll give Samantha a moment to catch up. And then Heidi, yes.
Sorry, one more request. I think it would be helpful to specifically request that HCD work directly with local governments when they are developing their guidance.
Okay, we've got 3 bullet points. Has everybody had a chance to look at those and are there any comments? Yes, Jesse.
Second comment about HCD data. I think some of that was Sandag data related to local jobs. We had a big issue trying to figure out the military jobs. And so I think that's more directed at Sandag staff.
And it has to do on, if we're relying on it for the RENA determination, that information needs to be available. So the EDD data is not.
So is the comment maybe talking about using a data set that would be publicly available?
Yes, it's important because all of us are being challenged on these numbers. So we need to make sure that whatever we're relying on is something that we can demonstrate the why.
All right, is that capturing it? Use data sets that are publicly available? Yeah.
Or the data sets that are used are to be public, will need to be publicly available.
The way I phrased it recognizes that the EDD data is a confidential data set. So
Yeah.
maybe the idea is Sandag should look at different data sets that could be viewed by anybody and are restricted.
That
the idea.
captures the concern that we
Okay,
were articulating.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. No other comments on these 3 bullet points under greater transparency at this time. So let's weigh in with our thumbs. It looks like we're a thumbs up. Thank you.
Great. On to the next one. Regional approach. So future RENA cycles should include a more collaborative regional approach to solving the housing crisis. When more housing is built in the right places, the entire region benefits, but currently just one jurisdiction gets credit in their APR. A regional approach would also ensure that housing gets developed in locations that support state climate goals. The feedback from the executive committee was to revise to allow for the regional approach in the 6th and future RENA cycles and allow jurisdictions to make allocation adjustments amongst themselves. And then they requested stronger language. The jurisdictions lacking space cannot build housing, but working together as a region, we can identify and build housing in the right places and provide the supportive transportation options.
Okay, we are on regional approach. We've got all the language in front of us. Any hands up? Yep, Heidi.
Being the jurisdiction that I believe is referred to in here as the one jurisdiction that's getting credit, I think, again, it's just important to kind of understand where this language originated in and what the desired outcome was. I don't agree that other jurisdictions should get credit for not providing housing. But I certainly do agree that a regional approach to housing in alignment with both state and local climate and equity goals is really important. We, of course, do agree that it does make the most sense from a regional climate as well as fiscal efficiency standpoint for the city to have that housing allocated to it. But we don't agree that there should be credit, and maybe that was just a difference in choice of words provided to other jurisdictions. I mentioned this earlier, I think in the first, the sustainable funding, it's not just funding for the housing and it's not just funding for sustainable transportation options. It's also funding for all types of other public facilities and services, as well as ongoing maintenance that are needed to support the growth.
Okay, yes, Amanda.
What I'm remembering when we were talking about potential change to the RENA, how we do in the 7th cycle, was the discussion of potentially trying to focus group quarters and homeless and all different types of factors in here. And we're saying, whoa, as small jurisdictions, it doesn't make sense. Don't pile that into the RENA. This is a regional solution that we need to work on for transitional and supportive housing and homeless facilities and all of that. So attacking it from a regional level. So I agree. It doesn't have to do with credit. But if you're talking about criteria for check the box for your housing element, these are regional solutions. You can't expect each individual jurisdiction to do that. We just don't have capacity to even work on that.
Tara?
Thank you. I think in this case, in particular for the county, we would be looking for greater flexibility for when affordable housing projects are built outside of the county jurisdiction, but are still relying on funding or county land for their development. So in that case, I think some of the impetus for this original comment was to try to see if there would be an ability for the jurisdiction that's providing resources to be able to get credit towards their RENA, since a lot of those resources are going towards the production of affordable housing.
And Heidi?
And I think that just, again, goes back to the allocation adjustments. when we talk about what is reasonably feasible, the allocation shouldn't have been made there in the first place. And so I think this whole regional approach really needs to go back to how the allocation is determined.
Yeah, to kind of jump on that, I think Sandag's
just-
goal when coming up with a formula should be, to ensure that all member agencies can succeed in meeting the arena and not get stuck, going through the legal process with HCD for 3 or 4 years.
I think that's a good clarification. And we'll wait for Samantha to be ready to show some draft language.
Yeah, you can go ahead and change it. Okay, so I have captured a couple of them. I need the additional information about looking for regional solutions. There was a comment about not having capacity, and I thought that was capacity in a resource sense, not capacity in a housing capacity sense. So I wanted to make sure I captured that correctly. So I have need regional solutions. Not all jurisdictions have resources or
It's resources and also space capacity for us small jurisdictions. We don't even have the space for an opportunity site to have a homeless shelter or a, the supportive housing, transitional housing. It's just not feasible to build.
sources. Okay. And then if folks could just take a look at the 4 up there and let me know if I've misrepresented anything.
For me, it's missing a bullet point that talks about funding resources to need to be allocated proportionally as part of that regional solution.
Okay, any other comments on this list of 5 bullet points? Where do we stand on the list here? You want to give us your thumbs? Are you ready? Okay. Noah, did you want to say anything?
I don't have any major concerns. I just understanding the greater flexibility for projects built outside the county when we're relying on county resources. I think, there's different resources for different pots of money that come from different places. And so I think if the city is bringing forward those resources, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense to be able to divert some of that credit towards the county. I think if it was if you're in close proximity to an unincorporated community, I think it would make sense. But on a resource perspective, I don't know if I agree with that.
Could I clarify that maybe if we're for that 4th dot point, maybe when we're saying resources, maybe we could say built on, for example, county land or utilizing affordable housing trust or the trust funds that are provided by the county for financing of the affordable housing project, just to get it more narrow.
Your thoughts?
Sure. So I think that kind of goes back to the same comments that were being made about like military housing as well as housing at UCSD. So whether or not that's being kind of allocated and factored into the city of San Diego when it comes to UCSD, I think the same argument would apply for county lands that are inside of a city jurisdiction. So if it's a specific, site, maybe that's a resource center that the county's operating, that they're building there, I think that's different from where it's housing in the city as opposed to just going back to that same example of UCSD.
So we don't have complete alignment on the 4th bullet. I think that's fair to say. Is there any way to address overarching concern by being less specific? I always think of things in terms of maybe there's too many details and it's got to back out further. Greater flexibility, that's a greater flexibility. Yes, Heidi.
If I could suggest revising the sentence to focus on greater consideration through the allocation process on these types of factors. But again, I think it's an allocation issue, not a production issue.
Okay. Yes.
So perhaps adding that in coordination with the local jurisdiction. I think it has to be a collaboration between the affected city and the county.
Does that capture it well enough for everyone to feel it's not stepping on toes? Some nods. Okay, we'll do another test of whether this gets the thumbs up then. Do we have thumbs up on the bullets? We don't have everyone. Joe, no? Neutral? Okay. To area, does that meet your needs?
Yes, I don't think we saw any thumbs down. So, no, I think we're good.
And, you know, a lot of people are contributing. That's great. If you haven't contributed yet, feel free to as well. If you have anything you want to add. Well, moving along, we'll prioritize number of people housed.
All right, and this is the last one that was included in the original letter, and then there's 3 other suggested principles to be added. So currently, the RENA focuses on the number of housing units produced rather than the number of people housed. This approach does not encourage housing types to support families and multi-generational households. And to better address the diverse housing needs of our population, we urge HCD and state legislators to consider housing people a priority within the RENA process. And this one received agreement from the executive committee.
All right. Are there any comments that we would like to add here? Eric?
Not necessarily opposed to this, but I think there should also be considerations that the long-term demographic forecast for most of the region is less persons per household. So how would that factor in to it if we were changing the RENA to have that be the primary factor?
Okay, good point. Heidi?
So my more specific suggestion is to work with local jurisdictions to develop a formula to count the homes. And the city of San Diego would encourage looking at the number of bedrooms as well as the square footage to ensure that the homes meet the needs of the population. So it's not really, demanding that larger units be built. It's just looking to count people housed versus the number of units built, because a 400 square foot studio houses a different number of people than a 2 or 3 bedroom unit does, typically speaking. And that's really important and can help cities tailor at the local level their incentive programs to meet the needs of their demographics.
So I heard meet the needs of the demographics and the people in bedrooms versus square feet, but I heard something different over here, Eric. I thought your comment was based on future projections of demographic.
I think my comment was just different, not opposed to the suggested language. I just think that maybe a separate bullet point was just also consider long-term projections and demographic trends.
Thank you for clarification. Amanda?
I think the clarification helps. What I worry about is making it too complex. Keep it simple. The unit count is easy, but you can tell more of the story because you have your demographics of your jurisdiction. You're able to explain how you're meeting the housing needs that way. I just hope we can keep it simple. And yes, the forecasts are different for different jurisdictions for sure.
Yeah, I could see how we could go down, the analysis, probably way too far. Just if we had, older single-family homes in a built-out jurisdiction like El Cajon, where maybe we're going from a 2-bedroom, 800 square foot house to a 3,000 square foot, 6-bedroom house. So then are we going to start counting additions to homes in order to capture capacity? So I could see it just going further and further down the analysis and being more and more challenging.
Interesting. Could that be captured as specific to whatever your jurisdictional demographic is? There would be an allocation specific to that? Heidi?
Perhaps I could recommend that we don't need to go into these details, and maybe we could have alignment that is important for the RENA process to have a desired outcome of housing people, so that it's a people-centered process. And that we would like HCD to work with the local jurisdictions to determine how to do that, or allow local jurisdictions to determine the best path forward for that as well.
Okay, so looking at the existing language that we had in the letter, it looks like what we're looking to add is that collaboration with local jurisdictions directly, because I think it addresses prioritizing the number of people housed.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. We'll look at these 4 bullets.
Is the intent to maybe replace the first 3 with the broader 4th bullet?
I don't think so.
I feel like we're overcomplicating it. I'm very concerned if we move away from counting units. Yes, we're all intentionally trying to house people. And I think if that's being conveyed, that's great, but we don't want to change how we're doing RENA to go into these details of additions and how small they are. It's too much data collection. We're already doing a ton.
Okay, so we're looking at potentially taking out bullet 2. Is that what I'm hearing?
Heidi?
I think we may not have alignment here. I do think it's very important to prioritize the number of people housed versus the number of units. I do understand it's more complex, but I also think that housing policy is complex. And I do think that the RENA process has some unintended consequences of incentivizing smaller homes that are resulting in the lack of production of homes for people with children and intergenerational families.
Any other comments on that item? Bullet number 2, we don't have agreement on. Okay, well, then if we don't have agreement, I understand that we don't move it forward.
Well, so I guess just as a reminder, we're taking the feedback and the comments, and we hoped to have, thumbs ups or sideways on everything, understanding that we maybe can't hash everything out in this one meeting. We will be back to bring the revised language to you at your next meeting on the 19th. So you'll have another opportunity to weigh in and to really try and help us in wordsmithing how this might look. So we'll take a look at it and we'll try and craft some language, and then we'll bring it back to you again to weigh in on it one more time. And then ultimately this will go to the executive committee for decision as to whether or not the letter gets sent to the Senate Housing Committee chairs.
That sounds fair.
Oh, I guess there is one question. So we understand we don't have complete consensus on the bullets. Is there consensus on leaving the actual original language? If we can just go back, this is where we did have support from our executive committee.
Is this language broad enough to get agreement? Yes, Patty.
Yeah, so is the intent to move away from unit count and focus on housing people versus counts? Because I don't see how that would work. Super complicated. It's difficult enough as what we have to do now just for units. I think we all agree the goal is housing people. That goes without saying. But just to try to create, the process is so complicated, and obviously what we do every day is complicated, but so that's not the issue. The point is, like, are we saying we scrap what we do now and focus on a new process, which they're never going to be able to give us clear guidance on what that even looks like and how to, I'm going to start measuring room additions. And I just think that's not realistic.
It sounds like this could be parked, perhaps as a suggestion. That there's a lot more dialogue around this one topic. I'm hearing there's a range of opinions.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to speak for the city of San Diego. I don't know, Heidi, if there's clarification that you want to give in terms of, I don't believe I heard that you were saying scrap the unit counts. I think you're asking that HCD would consider the housing people and how we might, I guess, integrate that better into the RENA process, but maybe you could provide clarity if you were looking to have it as a replacement to housing units.
I think there's a variety of ways to handle it. You could keep the units, but also provide an alternative, pathway to have certain types of units count differently. We do have the ability to track the size and the bedroom count of the units. And I understand that that is very difficult because I've recently implemented that system myself. And it is a lot of work. But it does help us in tracking that information, ensure that we are not just producing numbers of units, but that we are producing the housing stock that our community needs.
This may go back to the prior item where we talked about demographics and how it's unique per jurisdiction. And it may be tied to that as a way to move forward. So if we eliminate the second bullet, do we have agreement on the others? What do you want us to do, Terry?
Well, if we'd like to do a thumbs up, thumbs down on the removal of the second bullet and moving forward with the others, if we don't have consensus, we can move forward and craft language. And this can eventually, again, we're bringing forward your recommendations to bring them to the executive committee, who will ultimately weigh in on what we end up including in a letter that moves forward to the board of directors for sending to the committee chairs of the legislature, the housing committee chairs. So I think we're looking to, ideally, we would all be thumbs up or sideways, but if we don't have that consensus today, we can still move forward with the feedback and present that information to our policy advisory committees.
I'm in favor of deciding what we can move forward with and then not moving forward with what we don't agree on. But Joe, did you have a comment?
Oh, I just had as far as housing, when you build a unit, there's no guarantee of who's going to be in there and how long they're going to be in there. You might have developed a project that you thought was going to be for families, and ultimately those kids grow up and move out of the house, and maybe someone doesn't want to move out anymore. So you have a 4 or 5 bedroom home that is just for 1 or 2 people. So I don't know how you connect this people housed versus the units. So I just see a challenge with this particular item. Period.
So if we remove the second bullet, looking at bullet 1, 3, 4, and 5, can we move those forward? Let's give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on bullets 1, 3. Oh, here we go. Thank you. That made it much easier. Let's see your thumbs on these items, these 4 bullets. Okay. Well, we're not aligned on that.
Okay. We'll note that we're not aligned to this. And again, we are providing feedback and update to our policy committees, and we'll bring this forward to them.
Okay. Yes.
Just want to comment on the first one. I think it's not related to, not population reduction, but it's people per unit, right? It's not like overall population reduction in the future. We are not seeing that forecasted.
For the person who had that comment.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that change. It is a reduction in the very far future. but it's because of the persons per household.
Okay, I think we're ready to go to the next slide. All right, and again, these were 3 additional principles. They were not included in the original letter, but they would like your feedback on these. So the first is the preservation of affordable housing. So it's encourage preservation of NOAA using such as tax incentive to landlords of these units. And this was also a request for separate legislation. So to bring up separate, not only include it in the letter, but bring this up as separate legislation.
Okay, we'll take
Okay.
this. Did you want to take this one first?
Actually, since I know we're short on time, we're going to read through all of them so that when we can have kind of a discussion on at one time.
Perfect. The second one was vacation and short-term rentals. So coastal cities need the ability to regulate vacation and short-term rentals. They currently lack the authority to place restrictions on short-term vacation rentals without the approval of the Coastal Commission. And then the third one was reducing housing allocations in the unincorporated area. So encourage that HCD does not limit or reduce where housing can be built and that the region supports these areas with transportation options. And again, the second and third were in response to HCD future implementation efforts, which will not take legislation to move forward.
All right, we have a hand over here. Amanda?
So the second topic, I don't think belongs in this at all, and I would say it's moot at this point. The Coastal Commission recently changed their policy guidance on this particular issue, so I think this comment is probably stale. Right now, the current position of the Coastal Commission is that all new short-term rentals be in primary residences. So that's the way to preserve housing stock.
Yes, Jesse.
But I think in coastal cities especially, you can't, I mean, the market controls somebody buying a second or third home. You can't really control that as a city. And so cities being dinged for just being located in a desirable area, I think that's something we would want to push back on.
So I would say careful what we put in front of HCD. Right now, they're counting those as dwelling units. So I don't see how we're being impacted on this particular issue in terms of RENA.
I thought I saw that in the future, they're looking at kind of deducting that and forcing cities to provide additional housing.
Okay, yeah. So if it's a position that we're saying this should not be in RENA, that needs to be explicit. Because yes, thumbs up to that. We don't change how we're doing it. Dwelling unit is a dwelling unit. We need to count it that way. Don't try and parse it out and figure out, is it a short-term rental?
That's what they're trying
And
to do.
dragging down the Coastal Commission in the comment is confusing.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Clarification. Eric, did you have a question?
I had a comment that the RENA allocation, one of the reasons it was higher was because of vacation and short-term rentals.
So could there be some clarification on this wording so it's not confused?
Sorry, we were collaborating on what we think the vacation short-term rental one. Eric, could you restate your comment to us?
The comment was just in the cost differentials added to the RENA, our RENA allocation vacant units was one of those. And part of that was the vacation and short-term rentals. So I don't quite understand this comment. Or this statement and how really it fits into this whole conversation. I just want to say that it is impacting our RENA and how we're complying with it.
Yes. And so Stacy, I know, is pulling it up, but as part of the RENA reform effort, there were several ways in which how they were going to move forward with recommendations that took action by the legislator, policy considerations, and then just pure implementation actions that HCD has in their current authority to do. And this particular one related to vacation and short-term rentals is within their existing authority to change how they're viewing that. And what they are basically saying, short and simple, is that determining how many vacation and short-term rentals that you may have, deducting, that's being deducted in a sense from your housing stock. And so it could impact what you end up getting in terms of our region's determination. And so what the executive committee is saying is that cities have no way to, coastal cities in particular, have no way to regulate that. And so that shouldn't be something that they're penalized for, because if they could regulate it, then they would have more control. And then they could control how many units are vacation and short-term rentals versus how many are permanent housing for people who live and work within your jurisdiction. And so that's where the comment is coming from. And that's why I understand the comment about the Coastal Commission portion being moot at this point. But that's originally where it was coming from, is they felt like that this was being put forward as an implementation action for which they had no ability to regulate or control.
Right. And Joe, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I agree. I don't think short-term rentals should be a factor on of determining additional units. Because I mean, there are short-term rentals also change, at least in our jurisdiction. We units, some of them are no longer short-term vacation rentals from what were 3 years ago. We had a higher number of short-term vacation rentals. So are we going to get credit back for those units when they convert back to market rate? I think a unit is a unit, as Amanda stated.
I would just add that that's based on market conditions that are out of our control. Some of these units just sit vacant. We're a jurisdiction that also has a high vacancy rate. And it was not factored into our arenas in the 6th cycle, but yes, it should not be factored in the 7th cycle.
And that's what this is intended to communicate? Yes, Heidi.
Okay, at the risk of being controversial here, I do think it's important to look at the use of the units because that does determine what our community members need in terms of their housing needs. It is complicated. I think that we would need significant guidance from HCD on how to comply, but I don't disagree that it is an important factor in addressing our region's housing crisis is to look at the vacation rentals. Of course, there's challenges with regulating them and counting them, but I do think that it is important. So I would not be supportive of a statement that encourages that not to be considered.
Interesting. I hear that this is a market condition that's outside of our ability to control. And I understand that we're trying to say that since we don't have the control for that, over that it creates a conflict for us to be able to address the RENA. So maybe that is a little contradictory to something we've said already.
Yeah.
Just my comment.
We have 3 bullets, understanding that we have some contradictory comments within those bullets. So maybe if we can pull up this one. I don't know if we need to do a thumbs up sideways on this one. I think we know that we're not fully in agreement. So again, this is another one. Like before, we can take this to our executive committee and let them know where we were not in alignment in terms of our feedback related to this additional principle that they suggested we add.
I'd like to know if it's just one city that's in disagreement or where everybody else stands.
Yeah, we can do a thumbs up sideways.
I would just say too, that 3rd bullet, HCD can't give guidance. What we're saying is we don't have any control. We don't know how those are being used. That changes throughout the year. It's based on the individual occupants' financial needs and what they want to do at that particular time.
Just to clarify, so the language, how it reads in the report is they want to account for units that we lost to short-term rentals and vacation homes. They plan to model it using the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and that will use census data to calculate the change in short-term rentals and vacation homes compared to the number of units produced over a set period of time. So that's all the detail that they give. What they're saying is if 4% of new units produced over the last 8 years were short-term rentals or vacation homes, then they would need to add in 4% onto whatever that total is.
And that's a statistic that would always be challenged because we don't have control over how those people are using their properties. They can change.
Well, we have 3 bullet points, and I think maybe there was a call from the floor for us to weigh in on these 3 bullet points as far as thumbs up or thumbs any direction. Should we do that now? Did you, Patty, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I wouldn't be supportive with number 3 there. Want it removed.
So your concern is with how would need a significant guidance from HCD on how to comply?
Yes, because I'm just not supportive of being dinged for having short-term rentals because we can't control it. It changes. Census data is so not accurate. I'm not supportive of it.
So the first bullet actually does say that. Okay. Number 3 implies that there's some standard we need to meet, that we need guidance on.
Do we wanna
Chair, do
pull
you think we
separately?
should pull number 1 and 2 separate for number 3?
Okay. So everyone, bullets 1 and 2, where do you stand on that? Okay, you've got your tally, Terry.
Right. And then do we have comments on the first or the third?
Did you have another
I
question?
just am wondering if you can give some more context to the third one, because I don't understand how that would limit or reduce where housing could be built.
Based on my interpretation, but I still need to get like clarification from HCD, that is more towards counties in the state who don't have a COG, and it's where HCD determines where their allocations are going. So for us, since it's based on a methodology, I don't necessarily think it would impact us as much, but it was something that came up in conversation that we were directed to add as an additional principle.
Yeah, and I'll just add one additional thing, and I'd have to find the email, but we did reach out to the County of San Diego because it is looking for areas outside of census designated places. And so any of our population that is falling outside of that, which would mostly impact the County of San Diego, this would impact what potentially we would be using in terms of our region's determination. So again, these were feedback and comments that we received from the executive committee that we wanted to bring forward to this group for your consideration and comments.
I think though in terms of just where it's listed, I think the more of the takeaway was encouraged that HCD doesn't limit or reduce where housing can be built, and that the region supports these areas with transportation options. So saying that the region should have more control over where housing units get built and create transportation options around this.
Carlos, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a point of clarification on that. So why just the unincorporated areas? Why not other areas where housing cannot be built?
I think because that is what was listed as an HCD implementation policy. So that's sort of, we had presented the HCD implementation policies originally, and that was based on feedback that they had given. So I think it just stemmed from that.
Is there any indication that a reduction in these areas would create an increase for other jurisdictions so that?
So I think that what I'm trying to get at is I don't think this necessarily applies so much to San Diego because Sandag is in charge of doing the RENA allocation. There are definitely there are counties within the state who don't have a COG. So HCD is the one who is determining their RENA allocations. Does that make sense?
Okay. So why are we making a point of it if it doesn't apply to us?
We think the executive committee didn't really understand that it didn't apply to us because they hadn't taken a deep
Gotcha.
dive into the recommendations like we had. So we can make that clarification for the executive committee when we go back, but this doesn't really apply to our region and therefore we don't believe we need to spend time commenting on it.
Thank you.
I would say if it does apply to us, though, I don't want those numbers to be reallocated to the other jurisdictions either. That's what I want to make sure that doesn't occur as well. So.
All right, good
Thanks for the
comments.
clarification.
Thanks for the clarification. I'll hand it back to you two, or to Stacy to bring us to the end of this item.
Was there any comment on number 1, the preservation of affordable housing? Or language that should be built in around that?
I'm just in support of it. I'd like to, if no one else is commenting, I'll say I'm in support of it.
I do have a comment on that, just very quickly.
Sure, Carlos.
With regards to preservation, also, I don't know how much credit we do. I don't know how much credit we do get for the affordable housing we've already built, but I know National City by far we're leading the county in the amount of units that we've developed. We've put a lot of energy towards affordable housing. That, we'll continue to build affordable housing as we can, but we've have priorities to build all types of housing as well. And we don't want to be put in a corner because we're in a perfect place, et cetera, if we're going above and beyond. So I think part of the preservation point is also making account for those jurisdictions that already have not only naturally affordable housing, but also restricted units and have shown in other RHNA cycles performance above and beyond.
So moving on to next steps. So we're here today to work with you guys on updated letter language. And then tomorrow we're going to the Regional Planning Committee. We'll be back at this meeting on the 19th with a revised letter for your feedback and hopefully approval. And then we'll be going to Executive Committee in October. Once we get their approval, we'll submit the letter to the state Housing and Assembly chairs. And we will be monitoring legislation regarding RHNA and HCD implementation efforts, and we'll continue to provide updates on all of this reform to your staff, to RPC, to Executive Committee, and to Sustainable Communities. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. In the interest of time, we do have a couple other things here. Are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you. I do have public comments on this item, one in person, Catherine Rhodes, and one virtual, the original draw. Catherine, please come to the podium. Sorry, thank you. Catherine has left. So the original draw, please go ahead.
Yes, I think it's important as you are sitting here and talking about housing. And as I mentioned before, there are what you would consider probably migrants that are coming across the border illegally. They're getting the front of the line. So I would hope that whenever we're creating this housing and, wanting to provide it for the people, that the people in our communities who have been waiting to be put into housing, waiting for housing, are the first in the line, that they don't get skipped and have these people who are, crossing the border illegally. I'm not talking about ones that go about it the right way, because honestly, it's sad that ones that want to come here legally aren't really having the same opportunity as they would. But we shouldn't be putting those that are recently here ahead of the line and above all of the others who have been waiting for quite some time. You may not be aware of that happening. You may be aware, and maybe you want them to possibly get to the head of the line out of a sensitivity type of issue, but it would it just doesn't look good when we are doing that, when we are giving these people, first line and everything. So the fact is too, is that there's hundreds of thousands of homes that need to be created, and there's people that have been waiting for that for a very long time. So, I just would hope that you would take that into consideration and understand what a necessity it is to provide for those in our communities that have been here for a very long time, hoping to get these services or needs met. And they shouldn't be kind of skipped in line by people who have just come here, have actually committed a federal offense, and, get kind of like everything on a silver platter. I mean, they're already getting, hotel stays, food, transportation. They're getting potentially set to get $150,000 just to get a new home. All of the people who have been suffering for a very long time in our communities are kind of being pushed aside. So I would hope that you would understand that that's happening and make an effort to make sure that when these homes are being built and provided, that it is going to the people that have been waiting for a very long time, not somebody who has just come here and, is expecting to get everything under the sun right away. Because that's what's happening. You guys aren't on the border. I'm on the border all the time. I know exactly what's going on, and it's being kind of, brushed under the rug and act like it's not a big deal. But we shouldn't be pushing people aside that are actually, residents here and live here and have for a very long time. So please take that into consideration when you're set to provide this for housing. There should be some kind of stipulation that if they have, just come here, that they don't go to the top of the line, and the people that have been waiting, make sure that they get what they need.
And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you for your comment. With that, I'll remind everyone, our next meeting is on September 19th at 1:30 at this location, just a couple weeks from now. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you. I do.